Right, welcome, ladies and gents. The summer box office has been absolutely terrible. Obviously, we've all kind of seen that. We've all felt it. They're not really bringing their best, and everyone's begun to notice. You know, the movies that studios are making are just not appealing to the audience. They're just not. Their incessant drive to capture the modern audience, it's just not cutting it. There is no modern audience. Go back to basics. You're losing drastically. And there was a really interesting and revealing article here by The Hollywood Reporter. I'm a little bit late on this, so I do apologise. But it just says, summer box office clobbered by kryptonite. Domestic revenue barely matches last year. Now that's really bad. You know, with a whole host of movies that in, I don't know, 5 years previous, or what, not even 5 years, but, a decade before, would have been huge movies, huge movies. And not necessarily because they deserve it, just because the audiences were watching them and they hadn't got sick to death of, the product that had been rammed down their throat. So I thought this would be a really interesting one to take a look at. And I just think it's worthwhile, basically. So I will say, please do hit subscribe if you're new here and do turn those bell notifications on. I'm trying to get to 500,000 subscribers, and there's about 50% of you that don't subscribe, but you do keep coming back. So if you could consider subscribing, that would be great. No worries if not. Anyway, got my shilling out the way for myself there. So as this article says, the May to Labor Day season initially soared, but global grosses took a nosedive as foreign movie ticket sales plunged further and a glut of male-skewing tentpoles battled for scraps in the US. So I always find these kind of articles funny. They are funny. Just because I don't know whether they get it. And so let's take a look and see. Whatever happened to the mantra, survive until 25, the go-to refrain for theatre owners and Hollywood executives trying to remain optimistic when the box office kept slumping last year, with revenue lagging well behind pre-pandemic levels? Perhaps the mantra disappeared this summer when it became clear that not even the likes of Superman or even bigger and scarier dinosaurs could save the day. They're talking about Jurassic World, obviously. As the summer season wraps on September 1st, Hollywood is facing the worst case scenario. May to Labor Day ticket sales in North America barely matched the, 3.67 billion collected in 2024, even if the deficit was only $7 million, piling in on Universal and Amblin's re-release of Steven Spielberg's 50-year-old Jaws beat two new studio films domestically over Labor Day. And what does that tell you? What does that tell you? A re-release of an old film beating current films. What does that tell you? It tells you that the new films are not appealing to people. You've got a plethora of writers in Hollywood that are just awful. They're atrocious. They're ideologically bound. They inject their politics into absolutely everything. And their politics is resoundingly rejected by the masses, basically. And you know that because they're left-wing. And the majority of Americans voted for right-wing government. So you are basically walking uphill in a snowstorm. It's never going to work. You might gain a little bit of ground, but you'll slip and fall eventually. So all had assumed that this year's summer lineup would have the strength to equal or surpass the 4.09 billion gross in summer 2023, but it isn't to be, leaving studio execs and exhibitors in a state of shock. Well, they're shocked because they're so out of touch. That's the bottom line. They're just so incredibly out of touch. As they wrestle with how to operate in a new world order where moviegoing might never return to pre-COVID levels. One studio that's still smiling is Warner Brothers. Right, but what have they been doing? They've just gone back to basics. I'm very, very nervous for the future, says one top studio executive. There are all these studios and companies making movies. I don't think there is enough of an audience for them. Not shit ones, no. And how studios didn't realise, the sort of error, the folly of their ways, the error of their ways is beyond me. Lots of studios scrambled to make streaming services, thus completely destroying their secondary revenue sources. And now executives at studios are like, oh, I'm really worried. Yeah, that's because you're a retard with no business acumen. What are you doing? I said this at the time. I said streaming's not the future. And it's not. They're trying to get, box offices back off the ground. So anyway, it says here, that is not a sentiment theatre owners or many other studios share. They think the solution is more product delivered to their big screens. And that is actually true. So if you remember back in the day, I don't know, I wouldn't even know, like 30 odd years ago, whatever, maybe 25 years ago, what we used to have was like a whole host of movies releasing from every single studio every single year. There would be some rom-coms, some mid-tier action films, some low-budget films, and there'd be one or two blockbusters, right? A film which they poured money into. But it wasn't massive, and more often than not, they weren't even every year. And this is the thing. Now, movie studios are like, no, just $1 billion. We need to hit $1 billion. We're going to pour 200, 300, 400 million dollars onto this and just set fire to it because we're absolutely moronic. And that's what they're doing now. Their budgets are way too high. You need smaller budgets, more of them, sell the movies elsewhere. Sony's doing really well because Sony didn't cannibalize their secondary markets. So the season certainly started off with a bang, but grosses took a nosedive in the latter half of the life raft once provided by the foreign box office, nearly deflated, and a glut of male-skewing tentpoles battled for scraps. In North America, Disney's live-action Lilo and Stitch and Paramount's Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning fueled a record Memorial Day weekend. Lilo took in $182 million during the 4-day holiday on its way to becoming the only 2025 title so far to gross $1 billion at the global box office. And Mission Impossible opened to a franchise best $79 million domestically for Paramount. The late May bloom resulted in domestic revenue being up 25% year over year, but the downhill slide soon started. And this is the thing. I mean, even in this, it's the only one to cross $1 billion. Yeah, that might be the case, but it's this focus on $1 billion that's the issue. Since June 13th, we've had just one up weekend, which was July 11th to 13th when Superman opened, notes Comscore's chief box office analyst Paul Dergarabedian. Whatever fucking name is that? Dergarabedian. What on earth is that? Anyway, whatever. Beginning July 18th, the domestic box office has been down every weekend for 6 weekends in a row. The result, the year-over-year much-needed advantage has diminished to a mere 5%. Yeah, what do you expect? So Just Watch Media, which monitors trailer campaigns and movie-going habits, found that weeks ago only 25% of people said they'd prefer to wait to see a summer movie on streaming. A healthy sign. Now that is true, but when you're pooling a group of people that aren't interested in the movies being made anyway, that's not a high percentage, is it? So in more recent days, however, that number shot up to 36%. Again, still not that many people though overall. He says this hits mid-sized movies particularly hard, as well as being a major reason why the sheer number of people going to the cinema may never equal pre-COVID times. Because you cannibalised your own fucking markets. I don't think the studio system will fill the gap that started from the pandemic. It's not as mass a market anymore. It's about an even smaller group of people going to the movies more often. So there's a lot more streaming and watching at home. Mission Impossible was among numerous tentpoles competing for male eyeballs in the US. Studio could rely on the foreign box office to make up for any lost ground stateside. China alone, $100 to $200 million. And Western titles considered a hit if it earns $50 million at the Chinese box office. But they also thought that, randomly and wrongly, they also thought that, Mission Impossible was going to be a gigantic hit. Those films have actually never been massive. They're not ginormous. They're okay, but they're not absolutely incredible. It's really weird that they were like, yeah, we're going to sink hundreds of millions of dollars into this film. What are you doing, tards? Anyway, studio insiders say a raft of other markets in Asia have soured on US movies as local content flourishes. Yep. That includes South Korea, markets across Southeast Asia. One startling example is Hollywood titles used to make up 50% of the box office revenue in Vietnam. Now it's just 14%. The downturn has hurt super... But also, you're talking about, traditional and conservative markets where you're trying to push left-wing propaganda to them. What do you expect to happen? Honestly, idiots. Absolute idiots. And this just goes on and on and on and on and on. You know, there's so much stuff here that they keep sort of pinning blames on. At the end of the day, though, right? And this, you know, there's a little bit of a graph here. At the end of the day, the point is Hollywood did this to themselves, right? This is the F around and find out scenario. You have a wealth of writers in Hollywood that are just left-wing with no life experience. They're just incredibly left-wing, incredibly political. They inject everything into all that nonsense into all their movies. People have rejected it. They rejected it very, very quickly in the gaming industry. It's been a very slow Overton window shift when it comes to movies. But no one's going to pay $20, $30, $40, whatever it is now in the States to go and be lectured for half an hour. What would amount to about half an hour in a movie of absolute rank political crap, and then maybe an hour and a half, an hour of something which they try to make entertaining. No one's interested. Fuck off. Go away. So Hollywood needs a massive overhaul to fix this, and I don't think they're going to do it. I really don't.